Bodies stuck in caves, a man swallowed whole by a python, waves that dragged people out to sea, divers trapped underwater, and a tourist sub sinking with people inside. These are the stories of people who went to places they weren't supposed to go. There's a place in Utah called Nutty Putty Cave. From the outside, it's just a hole in the ground near a cornfield, but underground, it's a maze of narrow passages. Explorers knew it was tight in spots, but people still went in all the time. I mean, it's an adventure. Well, on November 24th, 2009, a 26-year-old medical student named John Edward Jones decided to explore the cave with a group of friends. Now, John knew caves. He wasn't reckless. At one point, though, they got to what looked like a small opening that dipped downward. A tight space, but they figured they could just wriggle through without trouble. However, this wasn't a normal squeeze. It was one of the most dangerous spots in the whole cave. John went in head first, and next thing anyone knew, he couldn't move. He was completely stuck. And just so you have a visual of how utterly terrifying his predicament was, here's a diagram. I don't think I can imagine a worse position to be stuck in. They tried to pull him back out. They tried ropes. They tried every grip and maneuver they could think of. But the more they pulled, the more trapped he became. And hours passed. Rescuers were called. Experienced cavers, search and rescue crews, even specialists from nearby states. They tried every technique to free him, but the rock just didn't give. The passage was too unforgiving. As night came, John's condition got worse. He couldn't move. He could barely breathe. I mean, he was upside down. Finally, he died. After a grueling multi-day effort, the decision was made to stop the rescue and recover his body later. Afterwards, Nutty Putty Cave was permanently closed, sealed up with concrete. This next story comes out of a village in West Sulawesi, Indonesia. In March 2017, a 25-year-old man named Akbar Salubiro left his home in the morning to go harvest palm oil. Something he did all the time around the fields near his home, but when he didn't come back that night, his family started to get worried. By the next day, nobody had seen him, so people from the village went out looking. They found his palm oil tools scattered near the edge of the plantation and one of his boots out in the grass. Not far from where those things were found, they spotted a massive python, about 7 meters long, roughly 23 feet. It had a big bulge. The snake had swallowed Akbar whole. They caught it, brought it over to where his belongings were, and then used blades to cut the snake open. Inside, they found his body. Reticulated pythons are some of the longest snakes in the world. They can stretch their jaws way wider than you'd think, enough to swallow large prey, but a snake actually swallowing an adult man is extremely rare. They call it the Building of Death. In Tenerife, Spain, there's this massive abandoned hotel that was supposed to be a luxury resort back in the 70s, but at some point they lost funding and construction stopped. What was left behind is basically a hollow concrete shell with no windows, no railings, and wide open drops between floors. It's been sitting there for decades, fenced off but never fully secured, and it's become the kind of place teenagers and thrill seekers dare each other to sneak into. In December 2025, a young girl went inside with some friends. At some point near the upper levels, she lost her footing. Being that the place is just an empty concrete shell, there are of course no barriers. So it was just a straight fall to the ground below. She didn't survive. And the worst part is, this wasn't some freak once-in-a-lifetime accident. The building has a reputation. There have been multiple deadly falls over the years. People have been asking for it to be demolished for decades, but it's still standing there. And people still go in to explore despite all the warnings. And Tenerife is also known for another dangerous spot. There's this breathtaking spot on the western coast of Tenerife called the Isla Cangrejo Natural Pool. It looks amazing in photos with bright blue water surrounded by volcanic rock, like something straight out of an Instagram post. But when the Atlantic gets rough, waves can slam over the edge and sweep people straight out to sea. And that's exactly what happened in December of last year. Authorities had closed the pool days before because weather forecasts were warning of rough seas, and they put up fences and signs in Spanish, English, and German telling people to stay out. But despite all that, a group of people, mostly tourists, ignored the warnings. On December 7th, a powerful wave crashed through the pool and dragged everyone in the water out into the open ocean. 4 people died and another was missing. Since then, police have been cracking down on people who get into that area when it's closed, issuing 66 fines in less than a year to people caught trespassing there. In Mount Gambier, Australia, there's a sinkhole called the Shaft. From above, it looks harmless, but drop down, it opens into a series of underwater caves. On May 28, 1973, 8 divers showed up to explore. John Bockerman, Peter Burr, Glenn Millett, Stephen Millett, Christine Millett, Larry Reynolds, Gordon Roberts, and Robert Smith. A 9th member of the group, Joan Harper, decided not to dive, opting to stay topside. The day before, the team had explored part of the cave successfully, but this day, they decided to push even further into a tight tunnel that sloped away from the main chamber. At first, everything was fine. The water was clear, the limestone formations were just stunning, but as they went deeper, the tunnels narrowed and they lost visibility, partly from silt that had been stirred up from the cave floor. And that's when the lines that the divers had laid to guide them back got tangled. The divers started to lose track of each other and panic set in. John Bockerman and Gordon Roberts were the first to get caught in a corner where the tunnel suddenly dropped. They tried to maneuver back, but there just wasn't room. Glenn Millett and Stephen Millett ran low on air as they twisted through the tunnel, desperate to find the guideline. Christine Millett was caught behind a pile of rocks, unable to turn around. 4 of the divers managed to find their way back to the surface, the others didn't. Rescue crews eventually recovered the bodies of John, Gordon, Glenn, and Stephen from the cave over the following months. In June 2022, 2 friends were driving through the rural Alberta when they pulled over to check out what looked like an abandoned property off the side of the road. There was an old farmhouse there. All the paint was faded, the windows were broken, and it didn't look like anyone lived there. They were expecting to get some eerie pictures, but what they weren't expecting was for this to turn into one of the scariest moments of their lives. As they walked toward the house, they hadn't seen any signs or fences, there were no warnings that the place was occupied, but before they could get more than a few steps inside, they heard loud pops. Someone down the driveway had opened fire at them, multiple shots. One of the men was hit in the leg and went down screaming, the pain tearing through him as his buddy grabbed him and yelled to get back to the truck. The shots kept coming as they scrambled away. Luckily though, they both made it to the hospital and survived. RCMP later carried out a search warrant on the property and found a stash of 14 loaded firearms, including 8 that are normally not allowed without very strict licensing. A 59-year-old man who lived there was eventually arrested and charged, not just for the shooting, but for how he was storing and possessing those weapons. In Canada, you're not even allowed to stash your weapons loaded. You gotta store the bullets separately. The YouTuber got caught last year trying to step foot on North Sentinel Island. If you've watched the channel long enough, you know all about this tiny island in the Indian Ocean. The people who live there, the Sentinelese, have basically zero contact with the outside world and make it clear they don't want any. The Indian government enforces a ban and makes it illegal for anyone to go within 3 miles of the shoreline, but that didn't stop a 24-year-old American influencer named Mikhailo Viktorovich Polyakov from trying to make contact anyway. Polyakov showed up on March 29, 2025 with an inflatable boat, a coconut, and a can of Diet Coke, which he apparently thought would help make friends with the tribe. He spent about an hour on the beach, blowing a whistle, snapping photos, grabbing sand samples, and filming the whole thing, and then he left. 2 days later, he was arrested in the nearby town of Port Blair and taken into custody by Indian police. Investigators say it was his 3rd time trying to get to the island. Polyakov was charged, and as of the latest reports, he's still held and waiting for his court date. Off the coast of a popular Egyptian Red Sea resort, there's a tourist submarine that takes people underwater to look at coral reefs. On March 27, 2025, one of these rides turned into an utter nightmare. A submersible called the Sinbad, carrying about 50 people, sank less than a mile offshore. It was supposed to descend about 25 meters into the sea so people could watch the marine life through big viewing windows, but on that morning the vessel suddenly went down. Within minutes the submarine ended up on the seabed. The Egyptian Coast Guard and Navy rushed to the scene, pulling people out of the wreckage and hauling them ashore. They managed to pull 39 people to safety, but 6 Russian tourists didn't make it. In the Peak District of England, there's this underground cave system called Eldon Hole. On June 24th, 1959, 26-year-old Neil Moss and his friend Brian Shore headed down there to explore. They were solid cavers, not rookies, but Eldon Hole had a reputation. People respected it and feared it. Neil and Brian had been in the cave before, but this time they found a narrow passage leading down into a deep pit. It looked like a route worth checking out, so Neil went first. He managed to shimmy down the tight vertical squeeze, waist-deep feet braced against the rock. He disappeared from view, leaving Brian at the top holding the rope. And then nothing. Brian waited. A few minutes passed. Neil hadn't responded. Brian pulled up the rope a little to see what was going on and realized something was wrong. Neil's body was jammed in the passage, and he was wedged in tight. Rescuers showed up and worked through the night into the next day. They tried ropes, pulleys, wedges, everything they could, and nothing worked. The passage was just too small. They eventually made the gut-wrenching decision to cut him free, leaving his body in place and sealing the passage so that no one else would get trapped down there. In January 1925, a man named Floyd Collins went into Sand Cave, part of a limestone cave system near Mammoth Cave, Kentucky. Floyd wasn't some random hiker. He lived in the area, made a living exploring and guiding people through caves. He knew those underground passages like the back of his hand, or so he thought. He squeezed into a narrow side passage called Sand Cave's Sand Crawl. It was one of those skinny gaps that cavers poke into to see what's around the bend. But this time, something went horribly wrong. Floyd went in feet first, head down. His leg slipped into a small crevice. Before he could get himself turned around, he was stuck. His foot and hip were wedged. He couldn't move forward, he couldn't back out, and the more he struggled, the more jammed in he became. He had no radio, no rope, no way to call for help. His friends nearby heard his shouts and tried to pull him out, but the passage was just too tight. Every tug on his body only seemed to wedge him in deeper. As night fell, they went for help. Word spread and reporters showed up. Floyd became famous overnight, just not in the way anyone would ever hope for. For days, rescuers drilled holes. They tried every angle they could think of. They fed him food and water through tubes they dropped down. They even built a shelter over the entrance so that people could stay warm while they worked. But no matter what they tried, they just couldn't free him. Floyd, exhausted and trapped in that horrible position, slowly got weaker. After more than a week with no way to pull him out, the rescuers were out of options. Floyd Collins died right where he lay. That has been the video for today. I will catch you, yes, you specifically, next time.